When I say spiritual practices, what comes to mind for you? What do you think of? Most of the time, I would think of like spending time with Jesus. That's what comes to mind for me. And if I were to ask you, why do we have spiritual practices? How would you answer that? I believe spiritual practices exist to help us bear fruit as Christians. If I were to ask you, how do you feel about your spiritual practices? Genuinely, I believe most people would say, I'm not where I want to be. And if we got really, really honest, I think we'd say, I'm a little bit ashamed. I believe most Christians carry more shame around the idea of spiritual practices than they do joy. And I hate that because I can relate to that, and I hate shame. Shame is the worst, and I think Jesus hates it too. I want to help us get a little unstuck from this place of shame and moved more into this place of saying, I actually have some joy and confidence around my spiritual practices in my life, and I can talk about it without going, I didn't spend time with Jesus today or this week. There's this thing we need to address, I'll call it our self-expectations. I want to introduce you to me, but not me. It's really the optimal version of me. It's optimal Cole, or opti-Cole for short. Opti-Cole, maybe you have one of these. Mine is relentless. He's always there, and he never goes away. And when you say it, you know that's unreasonable. Nobody can be that. But we have that version of ourselves, don't we? And what I have found is opti-Cole does not help me bear fruit as a Christian. At best, he's an illusion. At worst, most often, he's like a law that I have created and I judge myself against. This is why they're called spiritual practices. I don't need opti-Cole, I need practi-Cole. There are two different kinds of spiritual practices. We have the structured practices and we have the dynamic practices. When I say spiritual practices, you're probably thinking my daily devotional with the Lord, my weekly Sabbath, my monthly whatever. It is a structured thing I've tried to build into my life. It requires more discipline of me. It usually requires me to establish a new habit. It is structured, okay? The dynamic practices, these are the moments in life when an opportunity arises to practice the way of Jesus. You didn't ask for it, you don't control it, but here it is. This is when you're offended and you sense the Lord saying, I want you to practice humility right now. I want you to practice forgiveness and patience. Why do I make the distinction between the two? First, I want you to see you have a lot of fruit from both of these, but probably a lot of fruit from dynamic moments where you were practicing the ways of Jesus, and I doubt you've given yourself credit for that. And I want you to recognize when dynamic moments are happening, when they are like right here in front of you, so you can go, oh, this is a moment to practice following Jesus in this season. At the beginning of this series, Micah said, spiritual growth is not just what happens because you're a highly disciplined person. It happens when you are responding to what the Lord is doing in your life in each season. That's dynamic. Now, we want to have both. When the dynamics is happening, having structured practices in place augments the fruit that the Lord wants to produce. You've maybe experienced this, I for sure have. So I want to talk about how do we move forward in the structured things, and I want to give you some practical principles that have helped me, okay? First thing, you should put a spotlight on your opti-Cole. What do I mean by this? If you are at your very best, what do you look like, and what are your spiritual practices? And then I want you to stare at it, and I want you to realize how unrealistic it is. Next, start with where you're at. Do you go to church? Do you pray? Do you pray before bed? Do you pray at meals? Like, the things you normally don't think matter, but you do them, they actually do matter. Next, do not bite off more than you can chew. Do not add more than one or two things to your life trellis. What happens normally, we fill out like a bunch, and then we try it, and then we fail, and we feel bad, but we try again, and then we fail, and then we feel really bad, and then we stop trying, and now we're not practicing anymore, okay? The important part is that you are still practicing. You are still trying. Jesus cares more about fruit, not about getting it right all the time. So let's be practical and only start with a couple things. Next, prioritize what you can control, not what you produce. Practice is greater than fruit. If you do that regularly, you can control that. You can control showing up, and then the rest is up to the Lord. And if I focus on what I control, that helps me feel like I might actually be good at this. When you're in community, anything you think you can do alone, you can do way more with people. Most often, He wants to do something else. He never misses an appointment, and He often has a different agenda than I do. My expectations for my time with Jesus are often not what I need in my time with Jesus, and being open and surrendered to this has made a lot of the difference.